is up, guys? Welcome to part 2 of chapter 2 of the Scotch Gambit. This is going to be the Nakhmanson Gambit. So we're going to be expanding our repertoire here. We always start with e4 and we're looking at lines inside of e5. We always take our knight out and just attack this pawn, and we're looking at the most common response. I'm going to say 75 to 80% of the time you're going to see this knight come out and just defend this pawn like this, and then we're going to play d4 the Scotch. Remember, we could go into the Italian or the Spanish here, but we're going to go d4 here, the Scotch. There's no real good move besides taking this pawn, and 90% of the time you're going to see your opponent take this pawn, and then we play this move bishop to c4, and this is sort of the home base position for our Scotch Gambit. So chapter 1 looked at when the bishop moves out first and how to react to this, and now that we're in chapter 2, we're going to look at the most common move, knight f6, just bringing out the knight immediately and attacking our pawn. Now there's two main moves from here. We could play e5 and attack this knight, but I prefer to castle and use this pawn as bait. Even better, if I castle and now they play bishop to c5, now we can play e5 and we're in the max lying attack. This is the exact starting position of the last video. So if we go back, let's say we castle now, and instead of playing this bishop c5 move, our opponent just takes this pawn with knight takes e4. So the number one most played move in this position is rook e1, played by 75% of players. And this is definitely a great move, but I think an even better punch that will throw your opponent off the main line and is also reasonably sound for us, even though it looks kind of ridiculous, is playing knight to c3, which is under the attack of both this pawn and this knight. In this video, we're first going to look at this pawn taking the knight, then we're going to look at this knight taking the knight, and then we'll look at decline lines like the knight going back to one of these squares, or the pawn pushes. So let's just rewind real quick. We start out with this Scotch Gambit and we get the most popular move, knight to f6. We castle away and black opts to take this free pawn. Now we can set up the Nakhmanson Gambit with knight to c3. Let's look at this pawn taking first. When black takes our knight, we immediately have to put him in check with bishop takes f7. Just keep in mind, if the king ever does play to e7, we can always play queen d5, rescuing our bishop. So the king takes our bishop, and now we play queen to d5, checking the king and also attacking this knight. Now there's 4 places that the king can go: f6, g6, e7, and e8. If black goes to g6, we can just take this knight with check now. And now let's look at the squares that we're controlling. This bishop here is controlling this entire diagonal, and this knight is controlling all of these squares. Our queen controls everything in red, so the king can only go to h5, f6, or f7. So let's look at h5 first. If the king goes to h5, we can actually just checkmate immediately with g4. If the king goes to f6, now we can play bishop g5, picking up the queen. So the only square that black can go to is f7. Now look at how this perfectly lines up with our knight's entrance into this f7 square. And now if the king retreats to g8, it's an instant checkmate. The king has to come back to this f6 square, and now we have to know this checkmating pattern. This is a huge pattern in the Nakhmanson Gambit, so see if you can recreate this kind of structure in your own game. We're going to play queen to f4. Now if the king goes this way, we're going to be playing rook e1, and it's going to be an easy checkmate. So the king has to go to g6, and we use this very conveniently placed knight, which is defending f7, to throw our queen into f7 and check the king again. The queen and the knight are the most powerful mating combination in chess, so whenever you have these two attacking a king, know that you have tons of options. The only option for black right now is to play king to h6. We have this awesome discovery coming, but even quicker is playing g4, cutting off these escape squares from the king. And now queen to h5 is mate in 1. You can only stop it by playing g6. And now the pretty awesome knight to e6. The only thing that can block is the queen. And now the bishop picks up the queen with checkmate. So super cool sequence and super common sequence in the Nakhmanson Gambit. So if you can ever lead the king out in some kind of manner like this, just know you can take with check and you have these kinds of attacks at your disposal, whether you play g4, throw the knight in, or pick up the queen with bishop g5. So we just covered king to g6, and now I'm going to cover king to e7, just because these two moves are probably going to be the least likely moves you'll see, so let's just get them out of the way. The king is probably not going to come to e7 because it blocks in the bishop and the queen. But now we can take this knight with check. If the king comes to f6, we play the same game where we pick up the queen goes to f7, and now we play the same game where we throw in the knight. That's pretty much all the theory you need to know for e7. And now we can look at f6. King f6 looks super dangerous because it's walking right into our knight and also our queen, which is completely surrounding it. Not to mention, this bishop can come to g5, and it's completely in line with our rook. However, right now, a pawn is in front of our rook, and it kind of seems like black's king is in the middle of a tornado where it's completely calm. We do have a nice idea here where if we play rook to e1 attacking this knight cannot retreat because now bishop g5 becomes a serious threat. So how does black get out of this? He plays the in-between move, knight to e7 attacking this queen. This is a complete computer line, so if your opponent is playing this, either he's using a computer or he's just seen this gambit before. However, in the Masters database, there's like 4 games total in the Nakhmanson Gambit, so the likelihood of your opponent playing this is pretty low. Here we can just pick up this knight, and we're down a pawn, and we can just play from here. Computers would be able to survive in a position like this, but for humans, it's going to be pretty difficult with the king exposed like this. So that was king to f6, and now let's look at the most popular move that your opponent is going to play. This is king to e8. And now it's important to note that we're not going to take this knight straight away like we did in king e7. Here it was fine to do it because we're not helping black develop in any way when we check the king. But when the king plays to e8 and we take the knight now the bishop can block and we're starting to help black develop. When we take this knight with our queen, we allow black to develop, and now if we try to hit him with rook e1, he can hit us with the counter d5. And now black is forcing our queen away, as well as getting his light square bishop out. So this is too much momentum for him in a gambit where we're a piece down. So if we go back, we have to play rook e1 first. So essentially, in the accepted lines of the Nakhmanson Gambit, we take this pawn with our bishop, and when the king takes back, because the king has to, we play queen d5. And now black has 4 possible moves, but really just 2. These 2 moves lose instantly, and this is a computer move that if black knows it, he'll be able to escape a position like this. So that just leaves us with the last king move, king to e8, which is probably going to be played in every single game. We play rook e1 instead of taking immediately with the queen and allowing black to develop. We've already moved this queen, so we don't want to move it again when we can take this knight with another piece. So now this knight is frozen, and this is essentially where we're going to start to get our attack going. This rook is going to take on the next move, and the rooks are potentially going to double here. This bishop is definitely thinking about going to g5 and looking at the queen, and this knight is looking to come into one of these central squares. Let's also take a second to zoom in and see what's going on with this c3 pawn. We don't want to spend time collecting this pawn because then our pawns are just going to be doubled and we're going to have a bad pawn position. What we would much rather do with this pawn is do something like push b4 and eventually b5. We're perfectly okay with black taking our pawn here because then we'll take back with the bishop, and now we look across the board, we see our bishop is basically cutting the board in half. So this position with our bishop on b2 looking all the way across the board is going to be one of the more ideal scenarios for us. Also keep in mind this bishop doesn't really have to babysit this pawn because when we bring this bishop out, it's most likely coming to this g5 square. So it's most likely going to come with a tempo on this queen. So if we go back, king takes bishop, and now we play queen to d5 attacking this king. The king plays the main line. So now we play rook e1 and we pin this knight to black's king. There's a couple of responses that black has from here, whether blocking with the bishop or blocking with the knight. He can also play queen to f6. Also, if black is too wary of the g5 and plays probably the worst move in this position, h6, we have super cool checkmates. Like we can play queen h5 again, forcing this king off the back rank, and now we can play rook takes e4. And now avoiding checkmate in a position like this is going to be straight up impossible. For instance, the knight blocks, we take, the king moves over, we check with the queen, black's queen blocks, and now we can come around the other side and checkmate like this. There is one more option here, d6, but this is just going to transpose into the other lines. If black plays d6 here, we're going to take this knight, and now black cannot move this king at all. If black moves the king, it's going to be checkmate in one move. So now black can decide whether he's going to block with the knight or block with the bishop. So let's go back and look at bishop first. Now if we take this knight on e4 and black plays d6 now, this is going to be the exact same position. From here, we're going to start a three-phase attack where we want to double our rooks on this e-file, but obviously our bishop is in the way. So our bishop can come out to g5 and continue to put pressure on this piece. What's even better is now we're going to set up another pin on the queen. So we play bishop g5, and now we're ready to play rook a to e1 on the next move. Now, black played d6 because he wants to get this light squared bishop out. But where's this light squared bishop actually going? If the bishop went to a3, we could just take it. If it goes to g4, we can just take it, and we can continue defending our piece. If it goes to f5, we can just take it like this. There's no blocking on e6. So the only square left is d7. If black tries to play bishop to d7, he's now kind of blocking in his king. Either way, we're going to double up on the piece by playing rook a to e1. And now no moves are going to work here. If black plays h6, we can just trade off this bishop and now move into phase 2 of our attack, which is now bringing this rook over to the f4 square. We do this because we want to continue to attack this f7 square. Right now, if black plays a nothing move, we can now just go in on f7 and checkmate immediately. Now this knight is pinned, and if this rook moves anywhere, it's going to be checkmate. Remember to keep your eye out for fun checkmates, like if the rook comes to f8 trying to trade off, we can always play queen to h5. And now no matter what black blocks with, it's going to be checkmate. The best move in this position is actually just playing bishop to a3, sacrificing the bishop so that the king can get an escape square to run to. We can start to make this attack way worse by common ideas like bringing the rook down, but this is just going to be a difficult game in general for black. So now let's look at, instead of playing h6, what if black plays c takes b2 and tries to get a queen? Just know that this attack is just way too slow because we can take on e7 and we're going to take here with the discovery, and eventually we can just pick up this piece on b1. So if black takes back with the knight, we can now just move our queen to this g5 square, basically just adding to the pressure of this pinned piece, and now there's no time to queen. If black tries to get a queen on b1, we can just take here, and black will have to take back, and it's going to be checkmate. And obviously if we take and black tries to run, now it's just going to be checkmate this way. So let's go back. Now let's see what happens when black tries to run. We're going to refer to this third defense as the runner's defense, and the main idea is that black played this e7 move not just to block the check, but to give himself an escape square to get to the side of the board. If black can manage to trade off all of our pieces, he's hoping that he'll be a few pawns up, and he can kind of weasel his way out of this position and win in an endgame. So black plays king to f8, and now we continue phase 2, which is moving our rook to f4, trying to attack this f7 square. Now realize if the king were to just run back, it'll get instantly checkmated. So black has to block with this bishop. And now we can take here with the bishop or the rook, but I like to take with the rook to incentivize black to take with this pawn. Black takes with the pawn, it's an instant checkmate with bishop to h6, and the king has nowhere to go. So black will have to take with the queen, and now once we take black's queen, black will have to take our bishop as well. Now, both sides have a knight, both sides have a rook, so the compensation for white's queen is a bishop and a rook, but black's rook is all the way in the corner of the board over here. Besides this, we do realize that black has an extra pawn, but if white maintains an attack, he should be able to use his queen to harass the king and pick up extra undefended pawns. So in a situation like this, we're going to start phase 3, where we finally take care of this c3 pawn. We finished our main attack, and now we got to the situation that we were looking for. If we didn't get an instant checkmate, the situation that we're looking for is our queen against black's 2 rooks. In a situation like this, it helps to keep the king on the back rank and to make our pieces as strong as possible. So we're going to play b4, targeting this knight. If the knight moves, we're going to be able to swoop into b7, attacking black's rook, attacking these pawns, and hopefully getting all of our other pieces to the 7th rank. Let's say black takes our pawn, now we take on b7, attacking both the knight and the rook. Black most likely is going to retreat his rook away. We can trade it off, and now we can pick up this knight. So if we go back, Black first defends with this bishop, and we take this knight, pinning the new piece. We looked at Black first pushing this pawn. Black brings the light square bishop out to the only available square, giving us time to finish phase 1, which is doubling our rooks and bringing out our bishop to g5. Once this first phase is complete, phase 2 looks like moving over to rook f4, taking over this f7 square. Once that's completed, we can then play ideas like going from b4 to b5, attacking this knight, and eventually breaking in on the queen side. So that's the overall plan. Let's look at a couple other ways that Black can try to defend here. Black doesn't have to push this d6 pawn at all. He could try pushing his pawn to h6, preventing our bishop from getting to g5. But if Black does this, we have this super cool tactic, bishop takes h6. This rook cannot take because then our queen gets into the g8 square, and this pawn cannot take because now we can play queen to h5, attacking this king. The king must move over, and now we can play essentially phase 2 of our attack. If the king continues to move over, this is going to be checkmate. So Black has to block with the bishop, and now we can go back to phase 1 and continue our plan. Now let's think about this. Phase 3 is playing b4 and eventually b5, but what if Black tries to get a queen now? Obviously we have this rook defending the b1 square, so as long as this rook is here, it's perfectly fine to do this job, and it's also taking care of the job of cutting the board in half so that the king stays on this side. We don't even react to this move, we just continue on our attack by keeping the pressure on and playing queen to g6. Obviously on our next move, we're thinking about taking this bishop, and Black will have to sacrifice the queen, and we're eventually going to get a checkmate in this position. So just know if Black does try to get a queen here, instead of taking this immediately, we're first going to take this bishop with check. We have all of our heavy pieces surrounding this king, so Black has to take our rook. We can now take with check again, and Black has to move over. It's the only move. Let's hit Black with one more check and send it to the f8 square. This is just my own personal little trick that I like to throw in, because a lot of people would be tempted to just move this rook over, attacking our queen. It's kind of like the last desperate attempt to win the game, but now we just finish the game off with queen to f6, and when the king moves over, we can now play rook to e1 again, and now the king basically has nowhere to go. This knight blocking is just not going to work. This is going to be checkmate. So h6 isn't going to work, and we also looked at d6 and bishop to d7. Black can try a third defense, which is moving his rook over and moving his rook up to support his bishop. This is a very clever response because Black knows he's not going to castle. He already moved this king, so the only way to really get this rook in the game is to move it over to the f file. So we play rook takes e4, and now Black moves his rook over to f8. We continue with our plan of playing bishop to g5, adding more pressure on this piece, and now we see that if Black tries to play rook to f7 here, it's not going to work. Try to visualize what will happen when we take this bishop with our bishop. If the queen takes, the queen will fall. And if the rook takes, what tactic can we use to win the game? Bishop takes bishop, rook takes bishop. Now we have queen to g8, checkmate. So the only thing that Black can do is take with this knight. So now Black's knight is pinned to his king, and we just freed up this g5 square for our knight to jump in. We go knight g5, and now this rook has to go somewhere. Whether he goes to f8 or f6, we can now go rook a to e1 and continue with our plan, attacking this knight. On top of this, we could throw in the move of just taking this h7 pawn. Now we force Black back to that f7 square, and now he goes back to the f8 square, and we're in the very same plan as before, just continuing to pile up on whatever piece is on e7. So you may be wondering how we can get extra pressure on this knight after a move like d6, because it kind of seems like we have 1, 2 attackers on this knight, and Black has 1, 2 defenders. How do we add more pressure to this pin? We play queen to b5. Queen to b5 is going to provoke either this pawn coming up or the bishop blocking. Black probably will not bring this queen up because that will get in the way of the bishop coming out. But either way, we're going to send the queen to this e2 square. Now we have 3 pieces pinning this knight. Black can't lift this rook because then he'll just lose it, and moving the queen does nothing. Black is definitely going to get checkmated in a position like this. So now let's look at a fourth defense, which is just the runner's defense, but very early on. So if black tries to run right now and doesn't waste time playing d6 and bishop to d7. If black runs right now, we can still continue on with our plan of playing bishop to g5. Now black has to know here not to take our bishop, because then our knight can come in, and all of a sudden black's king is completely surrounded. Black's best attempt at defending is playing queen to f6, and now we can continue doubling up on the e file. Remember, there's no time to take on b2 because this would be checkmate. The best response that the computer can come up with here is blocking with the knight in some way. However, we can just trade off now, and when black takes with the king, we can now jump in with our queen to f7 and now make sure that we have an active queen. The king has to retreat. Now we can take this pawn on g7 and attack black's rook. No matter where black's rook goes, we should be able to pick it up. If it goes to these squares, we can just take it, and if it comes to e8, we should know this checkmating pattern. We play queen to f6, and now the only move is defending with a rook. Now we play queen to f8, and when black blocks, what move do we play besides the super awesome smothered mate with the side door? Knight to f7, super cool move. Everything revolves around f7. So let's go back. Black has to know not to take this bishop, and instead play bishop to f6. Black does get a second chance to play this move though, so if he does play d6 and now we double up, he can play bishop to f6 here and keep the position equal. We're now going to move on to our second plan of playing rook to f4, pinning this bishop to the king. We're in another tightrope moment here where black must play the move knight to e7. If black does anything else, we'll be taking this bishop, and black will either cough up the queen or give up checkmate. If black does find knight to e7, we can take this bishop anyway, and when black takes back, we can still play bishop to h6 here. The king has to go to e8, and now we have to remember, just like all of the lines in the Nakhmanson Gambit, we don't have that many pieces, so we really have to coordinate them and use them to our best ability. In this line, black has found some of the best defenses in the position, so we may have to settle for being down a pawn or two, but we can still keep an active position with queen h5. The king has to go to d7, and now we can start to get even closer to the king. Maybe black will take our pawn, and we try to keep active pieces, continually checking our opponent or threatening pieces, trying to even the material. So let's say that black does find the right move. He plays bishop to f6. So we continue with the main line and we finish phase 1, aligning our rooks on the e file. Black can do a couple things right here. He can play d6 if he wants to, but he can also take away our b pawn. He's getting ready to queen, and he essentially took away phase 3. We just finished phase 1, so we can just continue on completing phase 2. So now let's say black does want to get a queen here. The purpose of black getting a queen here is not to actually queen, but just to give himself enough time to start to get his other pieces out. So he plays d6, and now we move our rook back into position. Now realize here, we're right back into those main lines where we can start to take with the rook here. Remember, if black takes with the pawn, this will be checkmate, so black has to give up the queen, and now we play from here. We have the queen, it's just our job to keep our pieces as active as possible, maybe throwing in our knight to the center and attacking these undefended pawns. Once we move the rook back to e1, black has to play the move knight to e7 to survive here. We realize how cramped black's position is if he tries to play something like pawn to h6, attacking our bishop. Instead of moving this bishop or responding to this threat, we can now jump our knight into h4. If black takes our bishop, it's just going to be an instant checkmate. So let's go back. So if black does find this pretty brilliant move, we'll have to take this bishop with our rook. We cannot take with our bishop because then we lose our queen, and if we try to take black's queen, then black will take our rook. So a little complicated, but we'll have to take with the rook. When black takes back, we see both of our pieces are under attack. How do we take care of this? Well, we throw in the in-between move, bishop to h6. The king only has one square to run to, and now the knight is pinned again. So both sides have one knight, one rook, one bishop, and one queen, and black is given an additional rook and pawn in return for having a horrible position. So if you do end up getting into this position, there's a line that you can use to very narrowly keep the advantage, and that's moving your bishop into g7. And now the point is not to take this rook. If black allows us to take the rook for free, sure, we'll take it, but we don't want to actually take the exchange right now. What we want to do is play queen to h5. Remember, black can't block because the knight is pinned, so the king will have to move. And now if we want, we can start to go for a draw by going back and forth like this. If black wants to undo the draw, he can push this pawn. And now we can take advantage of the fact that this knight can now go to the e5 square, and the only thing that can take it is this pawn. Pawn takes knight, and now we play that same game of rook d1, picking up the queen. Now we'll also be getting black's rook on top of it. So in this situation, you have a great position. So it's essentially up to you to keep pressure on the position and continually attack and snag pawns. So let's go back. But let's say we play rook to d1 and black moves up so that he can take with his rook. We can throw in the check, queen to h6. Black has to defend with this knight because if he runs, we can throw in the check, queen to f6, and now no matter where black goes, he's going to lose this game. If he goes here, it's going to be checkmate. So if black's king goes to g8, we can now pick up black's queen, and black cannot take our queen because this rook is pinned. Just remember here not to take black's knight and then lose the game to a back rank checkmate. So on this move, we might want to get some luft for our king, but let's remember that instead of playing a move like h3, maybe go h4. And remember what the objective is to keep our pawns and pieces as active as possible. So when we do finally get this pawn, we are saving ourselves an extra move here. So we play queen to h6 and black has to block with this knight. Now we can finally take this queen, and when black plays rook takes d8, we remember that the back rank check is coming, so we play h4 and we continue from here. So we played rook to e1, and now let's look at when the knight blocks instead of this bishop. Black plays knight to e7, and that's going to unpin this piece. So we have to strike while the iron is hot. We take this knight. Now all of black's pieces here are pretty much frozen. The queen has nowhere to go. This bishop is frozen behind these pawns. If either rook moves, it really does nothing. This knight is pinned, and this bishop has to wait for this pawn to move to come out. So black's main continuation here is either playing c6, attacking our queen, or playing d6, getting the light square bishop out. Let's look at the most critical move first, playing c6, attacking our queen. So we have to move our queen away, and we want to keep the initiative. So we hit black with a check on h5. The only thing that he can do here is push this pawn. We're going to bring the queen back to e5, and now we get another tempo on black because he has to move this rook. The only place that he can move it is to g8. A reason I really like these types of lines is because a lot of them only really have one move responses, so you can really keep your opponent in the tightrope. And what I also like is we have a very straightforward plan of bringing this bishop out to g5 just like last time, and then moving the other rook to the e-file, essentially setting up a backwards Alekhine gun at this pinned piece. So we play bishop to g5, and now the best move here is going to be d5. Not only does this get the light square bishop out, but it also gets a tempo on our rook. However, before we look at this move, let's just understand why black can't get a tempo by moving this bishop out. At this point, we can just start to trade off, and black has to take back with the queen. We now take this queen. If black goes to d8, we take with a discovered check. So let's say the king goes to f8 instead. Now we go back to the original plan of going rook a to e1. This light square bishop is trapped behind pawns and won't be able to escape, basically forming a wall where this rook can't get to the back rank. So whatever black does on our next move, we're going to move this rook down and our other rook down, and it's going to be checkmate. So now let's say our opponent does find the best move and they play d5. Now they're freeing their light square bishop to come out as well as attacking our rook. Now is not the time to play rook f4 and go to phase 2 here, because we'll lose to this pawn fork. Now you may ask yourself, why can't the bishop go to f6? Well, it's because black could kick our rook away with a pawn push, and once our rook moves away, now the king is escaping this pin and now starting to attack our bishop. This rook is going to start to come to g6, and all of a sudden it looks like black is escaping our attack here. So we're always going to go back to e3. Now the reason I bring it to e3 and not e2 is so that it can defend this knight. So if this bishop does want to come out and eventually take this knight, now we can bring the rook over, and we essentially have that phase 2 rook, but instead of being on f4, it's on f3. What's important is it's on the f file, and it can take this bishop that's defending the pinned piece. And remember that black still has no time to play this bishop move because we can just trade off pieces here. When we get our rook to the 7th rank, we force the king to this f8 square. So we doubled up on the e-file, and now our goal is to get both of our rooks to this 7th rank. Now our plan is going to look like bringing this rook from a to e1 and pushing this bishop into this f6 square. The reason we're going to push this bishop into this f6 square is so that our knight can start to go into g5. Now the most common square for this bishop to come out is going to be this f5 square. If the bishop can go from f5 to e4, it can kind of plant itself in the middle of our position and cut off our pieces from pinning this knight. So black plays bishop to f5, and now we can either move our rook over, or we can push our bishop into this f6 square, preparing our knight to come to g5. Let's play rook a to e1, lining up all of our heavy pieces on the e-file. Black tries to cut us off with bishop to e5, and now there's a couple things we can do. We can either push this bishop into the f6 square, or we can even take this pawn with our queen and open up the e5 square for our knight. Let's say we take this pawn. Why can't this bishop just come out and attack our queen? If black tries bishop to g7, this bishop is leaving the critical defense of this knight. We can now play queen to b4, and we're attacking this knight, we're attacking this pawn. Black has a lot of threats that he has to deal with. If he pushes this pawn to defend it, we can now take this bishop. Black will most likely take our rook, and when we take back with the queen, we're now attacking this undefended piece, we're attacking this knight, our bishop and our rook are also supporting, and black's position is starting to fall apart here. So the best move for black here is actually just playing h6, defending this g5 square. So when black plays h6, we can now continue with our plan of going in to f6. However, now we probably won't be playing knight g5 because it's defended by the pawn. So we will probably shift our focus to going into e5, maybe moving this queen up to b4 and starting to attack these weaknesses. So we just looked at c6. Now let's see the other move, d6. d6 won't come with a tempo on our queen, so now we can look to attack this f7 square with knight to g5. If the knight gets kicked, we can throw the knight into f7 and fork black's pieces. And if our queen gets kicked, now we can send the queen into f7, and the king has no choice but to run to this d7 square. Now we're still pinning this knight, but the pin is along this rank instead of the file. This fully blocks in this bishop, it blocks in this rook, it blocks in this queen. The king is blocking in this bishop, and this rook is never going to come into the game. So black has a horrible position here, and now we can start to load up on this pawn. Instead of bringing both rooks to the e-file, we're probably now going to bring this rook to d1, attacking this pawn. That's the general plan for this d6 pawn. And now we can go into the last move. The last move that we're going to look at inside the accepted gambit is going to be queen to f6. So when black plays queen to f6, the idea is he's getting his queen out before he's blocking this check so that his queen is activated. Whenever we see this, before we even take this knight, we can hit this queen with a tempo by going to bishop g5. Remember, this knight can't take because it's pinned, and the queen has to go somewhere. If the queen goes over here, we can now just take with the rook, and black's in a horrible position. So black must go back to f7 here. Now, he's offering to trade queens, and we definitely don't want to trade queens because we are the ones on the attack, and we have less material. So now we can take with the queen instead, and now it's up to black to defend with either the knight or the bishop. If black defends with the knight, now we're going to start to get all of our heavy pieces on the e-file. We're going to play rook to e3, and now once again, we're preparing to bring our rook from a1 to e1. Now let's see if the bishop blocks. If the bishop blocks, we now have to remember this move of throwing the knight into e5, attacking this queen, as well as attacking this knight. Let's see if we play knight to e5 and black takes our knight. Black really can't take our knight here because now we can just take back with the queen, and we have just way too many attackers on this pinned piece. So the best thing for black to do in this scenario is to run away, and now we can start to take pieces back. And now let's say we take this knight and black tries to kick our queen away with something like d6. Now we can take away this annoying c3 pawn, and our rook and bishop are looking directly at black's king. And now on our next move, we're looking to play rook takes e7 or bishop takes e7. So black can't take our knight in this scenario, and the best move for him is playing queen to e6. This is a really hard move to find because you're essentially putting your queen in the line of fire of white's rook. So now we continue with our plan of taking this knight, and black cannot take our queen now. If black takes our queen, we take back with this rook, and our knight's hanging, so black will take our knight, but now we'll get black's bishop. Now the material is almost equal here, but white has just such a better attack that white should easily be able to win this game. So black's king has to run away, and now white's plan is to get 2 rooks to the 7th rank and start gobbling up these pawns. So that's pretty much everything for the accepted lines in the gambit, and now let's look at when black declines the gambit. The most popular way that black can decline the gambit is taking our knight with his knight. He does this because he knows that this knight is going to get pinned and probably lost anyway, and he's kind of afraid at opening up this position with his king still in the middle. So let's say he takes our knight, we're going to take back with our pawn. Now if black gets greedy and tries to take one more pawn, the position is already lost. When we play rook e1, black can only block with this knight or bishop. Let's look at the bishop first. Just like in some of our last videos, we're going to use this triple threat of bringing our knight to g5 and our queen to h5. So we play knight g5, attacking this f7 pawn. The best move for black here is to castle, and then we come in with queen h5. We're threatening checkmate in 1, and black can't push this pawn because we have this very common idea of taking on f7, so black will most likely take our knight. We can take back with this bishop, and now black's queen is completely surrounded. We just looked at the bishop blocking, but now let's look at the knight blocking. This move loses by force to queen d5, threatening checkmate in 1. The only thing black can do is push this pawn to give an escape square for his king. Now we can play this super savage checkmating sequence. We take on f7 and the king has to run, it's the only option. And now we attack him again with bishop to e6. Black runs out the side door to c6, and now we get to play potentially one of the coolest moves I've ever seen, is bishop to d7. If black takes with either piece, he's essentially making a wall where his king is sort of locked on the outside. We play queen to c4, and you can see how black is now trapped outside of his pawn chain. He has to move over, and now we can set up a pretty easy checkmate. Now let's say when we play bishop to d7, the king comes back behind the pawn chain and takes our bishop. We can now put it in check with knight to e5, and the only thing that black can do is take the knight. We now move the rook over, and it's the same story. Black is going to get pretty easily checkmated in a position like this. Now I'm very quickly going to go over some of the other decline lines, like if the knight were to go back to d6, attacking our bishop, we can now play queen e2, protecting it, and when black blocks, now we can jump in with our knight. We're going to have a good position from here, but we'll just play normal chess. Let's say black goes to c5 instead. He's not attacking our bishop, so we don't really have to waste time defending it. Now we could just take this pawn in the center, and if black trades off, this is going to be a pretty good position for us. Now the last thing that we're going to look at is just these pawn pushes, just defending this knight. d5 is probably going to be more common than f5, and now we can just take this pawn with our bishop because it's defended by our knight. Let's say black tries to remove the defender of our bishop by trading this knight off. Before we take back with this knight, we should know that our bishop is kind of vulnerable on d5, so let's just trade it off. Now when black takes our bishop, we can take black's knight, and we have a pretty good position. Now the last thing we're going to look at is f5. This is probably going to be one of the worst moves in the position, but anyways, we can just trade off this knight, and this might look good for black to have this pawn center, but our bishop can kind of sneak behind it and attack this e-pawn. There's no taking this knight, because now when we play rook e1, this is just way too dangerous for black. Let's say he doesn't want to lose the queen, so he blocks with the bishop. Now all of our pieces are kind of coming in harmony to attack black's king. So that is pretty much it for the Nakhmanson Gambit. This was part of chapter 2. So chapter 1 of the Scotch Gambit was when black brings this bishop out first, and we just finished chapter 2, which is black bringing this knight out first, most commonly to knight f6. And chapter 3 is going to start with d6 first, freeing up this light square bishop to come out. See you guys in the next video, and thanks for watching.